who's going, and we're going to record it, as it just said. I'm going to mute myself, and I will see you guys at the Q&A part.
Sarah Radlinski, does that look okay to you? Okay, great. All right, good afternoon. Welcome to the second half of our program today, where we'll be discussing how to better understand child behavior, such as tantrums. We're so glad to have you with us. So I'm Sarah Spencer, as Sherry mentioned, serving Central and Southern Georgia out of our Macon office, and Sarah Radlinski is a bilingual therapist in our Atlanta office. And we're going to be tag teaming it today. We're both auditory verbal therapists at the Auditory Verbal Center. So here are some learning objectives for our session. But over the next 90 minutes, we're going to shift the perspective on behavior, explore the concept of self-regulation, talk about why traditional behavior management techniques don't work, and then explain what to do instead, including setting boundaries, validating feelings, and then discussing what's possible both within and outside of a tantrum. We'll begin by examining our roles as adults working with or parenting children. You're here, presumably, because you'd like to investigate behavior management strategies that will better serve as long-term solutions and allow the child to be more successful, both inside and outside of the therapy room. We want to find behavior management strategies that work within daily routines, modeling these techniques and providing additional resources to adjust behavior strategies for each unique child, depending on their additional needs. As parents and providers, we begin by validating the fact that managing these challenging behaviors is hard work, and we are not alone in this. But it is critical that we find a way to address behavior, as it can make or break point in language learning. How many sessions have you had to spend either 15 minutes handling a tantrum or end early due to behavior? This time spent handling these challenging behaviors is critical therapy time that we can be using to address our AV goals or parent coaching. Additionally, a parent can't focus on learning the listening and spoken language strategies when they're trying to manage the behavior of their child. It is critical to the child and parents' learning that we address the behavior management outside of the moment of the tantrum so we can have greater opportunities to address the child and parent listening and spoken language goals. If we can better manage behaviors, including parents in this process, then home carryover of these goals will also be positively impacted. From research, we know that problem behaviors elevate parental stress and can also limit a child's opportunity to learn from adults and peers, which can have negative ramifications for language development and future academic success. This is why we, as either professionals or as parents, have the responsibility to learn and teach strategies to address these problem behaviors, arming ourselves with the tools necessary to teach our children to regulate their behaviors. So what are some traditional behavior management strategies? Threats, bribes, punishment, timeout, ignoring, and dismissing feelings are just a few techniques that are commonly used by parents and clinicians. Take a moment to reflect on which of these behavior management techniques you use or have used in your own practice. Of note, we are working within the authoritative parenting style with these techniques. In other words, positive discipline, which does not mean without boundaries. When we're handling these challenging behaviors, we are simply teaching the child effective strategies to cope with their feelings so that they can use them long-term while also teaching valuable life skills. Positive discipline have 5 core criteria, which you can see listed here.
So first, we need to have a shift in mindset, because the way that we view children in their behavior informs what strategies we will use. As Janet Lansbury, a leader in the field of respectful discipline, once said, "There are no bad kids, just impressionable, conflicted young people wrestling with the emotions and impulses, trying to communicate their feelings and needs the only way they know how." Another leader in the field, Dr. Becky Kennedy, urges us to view a child acting out as a good kid having a hard time, not a bad kid doing bad things. This difference is everything. We need to see the good in the child, see the child as a good kid who is struggling. The child is having a hard time, not intentionally giving us a hard time. When we reframe behavior like that, it softens us. We can think, wow, you are really struggling and having a difficult time right now. Instead of thinking, oh, this child is being so bad, I just want to do a Link 6 sound check. Why can't he just behave? Reframing preserves relationships. The child's relationship with us as therapists, teachers, audiologists, etc., and also the parent-child relationship. When we see the child as a good kid who is struggling, it pushes us to help the child build skills because we see that they are doing the best they can with the resources that they have in that moment. The premise of Dr. Becky Kennedy's work is that we are all good inside. And so we need to help build skills, not punish the child for not having skills. Furthermore, the child needs protection from the identity of being a bad kid. We know that children have the developmental tendency to take experience exhibiting bad behavior and make it their identity. I am a bad kid. We also know that children who feel badly about themselves behave badly. This just creates a vicious cycle. Furthermore, how we react to behaviors influences a child's emerging self-image. Kids look to us, parents, therapists, teachers, to see what we are thinking. And nothing can change in a positive direction until children see the reflection back that they are a good kid having a hard time. We need to see the good inside them before they can locate it for themselves. The difference between shame and guilt at first glance may appear nuanced, but it's so critical. Shame focuses on identity. I am bad. While guilt focuses on behavior. I'm still a great kid. I made a bad choice. So we need to help children separate their behavior from their identity. I sometimes hear the feedback, okay, but when I shame my child, he does stop that behavior. So shame seems to work for him. But as Brene Brown once said, the truth is you can change a child's behavior on a dime with shame for this simple reason. Children experience shame as the threat of being unlovable. It's not very difficult to use shame to turn their behavior around. However, while shame may be effective in the difficult moment, what is the long-term cost? Longitudinal studies on shame are clear that shame-prone kids are more likely to drop out of school and be involved in high-risk sex, drug, and alcohol behaviors. We know that long-term shame is correlated with addiction, suicide, eating disorders, bullying, violence. Another way of thinking about this is through Ross Green's collaborative and proactive solutions model, where the premise is kids do well if they can. And so when kids are not doing well, we need to identify lagging skills and unsolved problems and start solving these problems collaboratively and proactively. CPS is an evidence-based treatment approach that is especially effective for older children with very tough behavioral challenges. Kids do well if they can is in direct contrast to what is commonly believed. Kids do well if they want to. If you have a kids do well if they want to philosophy, then when a child isn't doing well, the belief is that it's simply because he doesn't want to. This informs how we respond to behavior, focusing on punishments for bad behavior and incentives for good behavior, since the belief is that the problem was the child just wasn't motivated enough. So let's flip the role of the adult from incentivizer to figuring out what is getting in the child's way. If kids do well, they would do well. In other words, if the kid had the skills to exhibit adaptive behavior, he wouldn't be exhibiting challenging behavior. That's because doing well is always preferable to not doing well. Don't all of us do the best we can in the circumstances we find ourselves in? So let's ground ourselves in the right framework and see what's really happening for the child when they exhibit meltdowns and problem behaviors, so we can come up with effective strategies for change. One last way to think about this is through the lens of most generous interpretation. This is a concept put forth by Dr. Becky Kennedy. It's a form of forced empathy or perspective taking. It's thinking, what is the most generous interpretation of this child's behavior? This doesn't mean boundaries change, but it allows us to access empathy. It's thinking, why would I do the same thing? either now or as a young child. It's seeing the child as a good kid who is struggling and remembering that we're on their team. It's not us against them. It's knowing that the child is good inside, but seeing that they aren't behaving good on the outside. It's replacing judgment with relating. What might I have needed or been struggling with? And activating our curiosity because we see a gap. We're now going to discuss what behavior really is. Next slide. We're now going to discuss what behavior really is. So on the surface, you might see crying, throwing, hitting, kicking, or pushing, but what you may not see below the surface are all of the needs and feelings that are actually driving that behavior. So we like to think of behavior as the tip of the iceberg. Behavior is the observable response to the child's internal and external experiences. Behavior is the part that you see above the surface, but the largest and most important piece is underneath the surface. All of the child's feelings, urges, stresses, impulses that he's struggling with. We want to wonder what is underneath a child's behavior so we can help children build skills that they need to have fewer of those hard moments. Often, when a child exhibits difficult behavior, there's the assumption that the child is deliberately misbehaving or being defiant, when in reality, it's just the child's body's stress response and their difficulty staying emotionally regulated. We want to wonder what could be going on for this child, rather than seeing the behavior as the whole truth and the child's identity. When we see behavior that is problematic or difficult, we often ask, how do we get rid of it? How can we get the child to stop doing this? However, the question we should be asking is, what does this behavior tell us about the child? We have to understand before we intervene, or we won't think of the strategies that are actually going to be useful in the moment. So we can only help children change if we understand what's motivating their difficult behavior in the first place, all of those underlying feelings, urges, and impulses. We know that when kids act bad, they're feeling bad. And if we don't take care of their feelings first, we have little chance of engaging their cooperation. We tend to welcome positive feelings. The child says, I love making lemonade during our teletherapy session. We think, glad to hear it. Or your toddler squeals in delight at the chocolate syrup covered learn to listen sound activity. We nod approvingly and smile. But if the preschooler you're working with yells, I hate you, or I don't want to do this, and starts hitting his mother, or your toddler client crosses his arms, shakes his head, and starts throwing everything off of the table, it's easy to deny or diminish their feelings. You don't mean that. You loved this last time. Adults also don't want to give power to negative feelings, but when kids don't feel right, they can't behave right. Making a child feel worse does not make them behave better. Kids having difficult behavior need our help, not only learning skills, but also feeling good inside. We can't change the behavior before we work on the underlying feeling. So all feelings get a yes and can be accepted. There are no bad or wrong feelings. However, certain behaviors certainly cannot be tolerated. We set boundaries around them, as we'll discuss. However, it needs to be perfectly okay for children to want what they want, even when we won't give it to them. No matter how unfair or ridiculous our child's stance seems, we don't coerce, argue, or judge. One of our roles as adults is helping children differentiate and separate behavior from the underlying feelings and urges. Behaviors occur because the feeling was bigger than their coping skills. The underlying feelings and urges aren't the problem. The problem is that the child's regulation skills haven't developed yet, so they can't cope with the overwhelming feeling, and it explodes out of their body as a behavior. We want children to learn that all feelings are okay. Otherwise, the child will have to keep getting the feelings quickly out of their body in the form of behavior or suppressed feelings, which also isn't healthy and leads to longer issues long term. So in sum, we can't teach kids to regulate feelings that they don't allow themselves to have.
So this brings us to the idea of self-regulation. Self-regulation is a process of executive functioning, and many studies have shown that it's critically important to our success as we get older. It's the ability to monitor and manage your state of emotion, thoughts, energy, and general state of being. Basically, think about it as the difference between I don't want to do this thing because someone else will be mad at me, and I don't want to do this thing because it's bad for me and I intrinsically know it's wrong. The latter is an example of self-regulation. We're going to talk about self-regulation as it applies to emotional regulation here, but it really is the cornerstone of how we learn to regulate our behavior throughout the lifespan. Dysregulation is the state of having a feeling that is stronger than your skills to cope with that feeling. It's normal, and it's how we all start out. Dysregulation and self-regulation is moderated by the process of co-regulation. When we talk about co-regulation, we're essentially modeling and scaffolding this moment for the child. The adult shows up, allows the child to have the feelings and the tantrums, and the child is seeing a calm, sturdy parent who can handle this feeling that's too big for them. Regulation starts with showing the child that we all have big feelings, that it's okay to have that feeling, and that we can get through the big feelings safely. This metaphor helps to illustrate what's going on during co-regulation. The storm the child is experiencing with large waves that they're unable to sail through meets the calm, smooth waters that we're capable of experiencing as adults, and the result is choppy water. It may not be fun to sail in, it may not always be pretty, but it's navigable. Now that you understand the basic concept of self-regulation, I want to visit some traditional behavior management techniques, many of which are considered mainstream. I want you to think critically about whether or not these techniques build self-regulation skills through co-regulation or not. Most traditional behavior management techniques center around punishment. Punishment assumes that the recipient has a skill and chose not to use it. Punishment centers around the fear of external anger or consequences and does not teach the skill necessary to make a different choice. Punishments often seem to work in the moment as the child freezes or demonstrates remorse, but it can actually increase undesired behavior and result in sneakiness, resentment, and low self-worth. Threats go hand in hand with punishment. For example, on an international flight, a threat would be telling your child, if you don't stop kicking that seat, I'm going to throw you out of this airplane. I'm sure we've all heard or said something along these lines before. We all know that that consequence isn't going to happen, even the child. Even when the threat is realistic, such as you won't get to go to the playground if you throw your food. These consequences are unrelated to the initial behavior and are externally regulated. Bribes also have the same pitfalls. Rewards may control a single behavior, but they don't teach intrinsic motivation skills necessary for self-regulation. Ignoring as a strategy seems much more benign when contrasted with punishment, but is it really? Ignoring also does not teach any skills and relies on the child experiencing an external consequence rather than developing internal regulation of their behavior. What does it teach children when we ignore the tantrum or put them in timeout? It really collapses the feeling and the behavior into one bad thing and subsequently places that label onto the child as a bad child. As the child grows older, the ignoring of the behavior leads to this idea that we must suppress our emotions, because if we don't, then we'll end up alone. By contrast, allowing children to express their feelings and co-regulating through them allows them to understand that we can both manage their feelings and see emotions as what connects them to others. One of the adult's main jobs is to help separate the feeling from the behavior, the essence of regulation. Simone Davies summed it up well, stating that ignoring the tantrum directs their feelings at us instead of at the problem that upset them. It creates conflict just when they are needing connection. Timeouts are another common form of behavior management, which on the surface seems benign. As adults, we often need a timeout from an argument or conflict to cool off and think about the problem rather than reacting in the moment. For children, though, using a forced timeout doesn't have the same effect as when we self-impose it as an adult. Timeout doesn't address the underlying problem, nor does it teach the child how to handle the situation any differently than they did in the first place. The child can feel isolated by the time apart from the parent in the midst of a big feeling, isolating them in a similar manner that ignoring them does. This leads to the equation mistake or big feeling equals alone. Once again, the child is left alone with their dysregulation with no support to reach a self-regulation state of being. So what happens the next time they have this feeling? What happens when it comes up in their body? Our kids have no skills to manage the feeling, and now they're scared of it, and they have to get that feeling, again, out of their body because it feels so dangerous. Enter hitting, biting, throwing, etc. And the cycle of out of control behavior continues. And being honest, during timeout, children rarely reflect on their behavior, but rather feel shame, are distracted, or have a resistance towards the punishment. And they're more often fantasizing about revenge rather than resolving to be a better person. That said, I'm sure many of you, myself included, can think of a child with whom timeout seemed to be a cure-all. It really clicked with them. And for some kids, timeouts are effective at the time. However, what it creates is a people-pleasing tendency in these children, triggering the universal childhood fear of abandonment. And the child thinks something along the lines of, I'm such a bad kid. It's all my fault. I need to be lovable and push down all of the other parts of me. The child blames themselves during timeout, loads up on guilt and shame, learning the cycle of feeling, turning into shame, turning into self-criticism, and back again. This employs many licensed therapists around the world. Dr. Becky stated that all kids reach an age when they essentially say, you can't give me a timeout anymore, and I don't care about your sticker charts. And then what do you have? Well, nothing. Only years of missed opportunities to connect to your child and build the emotional regulation skills they need for life. And it's true. Out of control feelings without co-regulation that helps them to learn how to deal with them turns into endless cycles of out of control behaviors that only get worse as they get older and the stakes get higher. Punishment, ignoring, and timeout don't teach the necessary skills that are missing in the first place, and further embed the child in a bad kid role. While these techniques work every once in a while, it's not sustainable and typically forces us to learn how to deal with these emotions later in life on our own. So you may be thinking, okay, I buy that. That makes sense. But what do I do about it? This is all I've ever been taught. How do I manage my kids or the kids I work with without these strategies? Doesn't that lead to chaos? Isn't that just permissive parenting? The short answer is no. And Sarah and I will tell you how. By being secure in your role in the dynamic. So I want you to think of yourself as simply an adult, whether you're a parent or the speech language pathologist, it doesn't really matter. Your job as an adult is threefold: to establish safety through setting and holding boundaries, provide validation, and provide empathy. You are going to embrace yourself as a calm, sturdy leader, confident in what you're doing, whether it's making dinner in the middle of a tantrum or trying to hold a session while a child is having a meltdown. The child's job is much simpler, although I'll argue that it's just as difficult. It's to experience and express feelings. That's it. Experience and express feelings in order to build regulation skills critical for life. In this framework, it's the adult's job to set a boundary and stay firm. And it's the child's job to push those boundaries and figure out where the limits are. By the adult showing the child what they want them to do and the child asking questions in the form of pushing boundaries, each party is doing their role to ensure that they are working well together. Many out of control moments with children come from confusion of jobs. Either the boundaries shift unexpectedly or the child is asked to suppress their emotions. This shows the child an unstable environment and leads to unwanted behavior. Therefore, the child needs to see you are not unnerved by him. It's critical in any system to define our roles and responsibilities. This helps a system run smoothly. The opposite is true as well. Systems break down when members are confused about their roles or when they start taking on other people's duties. So working within the jobs framework while keeping this idea of building regulation skills in mind, let's set out on some boundary work. As Dr. Becky said, kids hit, throw, and kick not because they don't respect you or because they're trying to be bad. It's because they're dysregulated, hyper-aroused, and out of control. Boundaries are critical, but this is often where families have trouble figuring out how to set a boundary without a punishment. Here's how. Instead of making threats and telling our kids what they need to do or what they can't do, for example, stop hitting your sister or do not throw those blocks, we must tell them what we will do. I will not let you hit your sister, or I am going to put the blocks away. In essence, we're taking the impetus off of them to make the right choice and putting it on ourselves to show them what the right choice is. We often have to stop the behavior so the child doesn't hurt someone else, but we also have to stop the behavior so the child doesn't feel so out of control, ultimately hurting themselves. This is where we protect the child from feeling like a bad kid while teaching them that we do have a boundary here. This phrase of "I won't let you" can be a powerful tool to start changing the onus from what the child needs to do to setting the boundaries that define what you are telling the child what you as the adult will do. It tells the child that the adult is going to step in and be the leader that they need in this moment, being the boundary that the child can't be for themselves. Instead of using the royal "we," to which the child may think, well, you may not, but I sure do. We use "I won't let you." So instead of a timid phrase or describing the functionality of objects, like blocks are not for throwing, we simply tell the child that we won't let them do that. It's much more powerful than alternatives and doesn't rely on the idea that the child has the ability to make a better choice while in an escalated state. They simply don't. Using "I will" or "I won't let you" means you're saying, I will keep you safe. I am confident that I can be the leader that you need. It sets a solid and clear boundary. When setting boundaries, we must be firm in them, not just in that moment, but consistently over time. What is psychologically unsafe is to react one day to a certain behavior through soft talking or allowance, and on the next day, that same behavior causes the adult to explode in anger. If we keep moving the fence on where the boundaries are, the child is constantly having to test where the limits are, and thus is not doing the developmental work that he needs to be doing, such as playing and learning. The more we can hold boundaries consistently and calmly, the more predictable things are for the toddler brain and the safer their space is to learn and explore. If you suspect that you will cave, it's really better to say yes the first time. As long as it's safe, saying yes right away keeps the power in your hand rather than giving your child a chance to win a power struggle or having to engage in one in the first place. Having too few boundaries often gives the child a space that is too large for exploration and can become scary and volatile. Boundaries for kids can feel like swaddling or safety bumpers. Janet Gonzalez-Mena paints a picture of this for us. Imagine driving over a bridge in the dark. If the bridge has no railings, we will drive across it slowly and tentatively. But if we see railings on either side of us, we can drive over the bridge with easy confidence. So you can imagine it's scary for kids when they think they can do things that can really put them in harm's way. We can frame it like this. My number one job as an adult is to keep you safe. Right now, safety means holding a child's hand when they're trying to hit, or bringing them to their room to sit quietly together when we are overwhelmed. Sometimes it means putting on their shoes when it's cold outside, even if they don't want to wear shoes that day. The child may not like it, but it's a boundary that keeps us safe. Escalating behavior often indicates that the boundary is too far out or hasn't been consistent. It's important to recall that if you as the adult are getting frustrated, it also means that your boundary is too far out for you. You needed to set a boundary earlier and are realizing this in the moment. Rather than saying, my child is annoying me, I really don't want to play hide and go seek again, and getting frustrated towards them when they ask for the 15th time, we can reframe to, I set my boundary too far out. I really need to stop playing hide and go seek earlier so that this can stay a pleasant experience for both of us in the future. That said, boundaries are separate from feelings. A child's feelings do not dictate the adult's boundaries, nor do the adult's boundaries dictate the child's feelings. You may set a beautiful boundary, keeping the child safe while remaining calm, and the child may not like that very much. Remind yourself during a meltdown that the child is doing his job, and I must do my job and hold the boundaries. I can promise you that the child is not likely going to respond to an adult doing their job well by saying, that was really great boundary setting. Good job. Their job is to feel their feelings, even when that feeling is, I don't like what you're doing very much, Miss Sarah. The adult's job is not to control a kid's feelings, so you shouldn't feel defeated when they have an emotional reaction, no matter how big of a drama queen you feel like they're being. They're just doing their job too.
As Sarah stated, the adult's job is not to control the child's feeling, but it is our job to validate those feelings and empathize. Dr. Dan Siegel coined the term name it to tame it. This refers to describing what is happening and how the child might be feeling, because it helps them process their emotions and helps the child calm down because he feels seen. All of us feel relieved when our feelings are acknowledged and accepted, and pretty angry when our feelings are denied or diminished as not important. Children's emotions are just as real and important to them as our adult emotions are to us. While some behaviors certainly must be limited, all feelings can be accepted. The child needs to see that the adult believes their feelings and that their feelings are okay, that they're real. No matter how ridiculous a child's point of view might seem, he needs that validation. The best way to help a child get over it is to help them go through it. Don't minimize the child's problems or diminish their feelings by saying things such as, "You're okay, you're fine, don't cry, it's not a big deal." When we validate the child's feelings underneath the behavior, this allows the child to learn to then regulate those feelings. They can't learn to regulate feelings that they don't allow themselves to have. Regulating feelings results in fewer behavior problems. In contrast, when feelings are invalidated, the feelings get bigger and the child can't regulate, and even more problem behaviors occur. So we want to name the feeling and validate it. If we only stop the behavior and don't validate the underlying feeling, the child is left thinking, wow, this feeling got me in so much trouble. This teaches the child that the feeling is as bad as the behavior. Therefore, while we do need to help a child stop a behavior through clear boundaries, we also want to normalize the underlying feeling and let the child know that the feeling was okay, even if their behavior wasn't. Acknowledging isn't agreeing with or condoning the child's actions. It's validating the feelings behind them, such as, I won't let you throw blocks at your brother, and then physically stopping the throwing. You feel frustrated your tower fell. It's okay to feel frustrated. We can acknowledge feelings, obviously, with words, although try to match the emotion so it doesn't come across as patronizing. No one wants to be told to calm down, even if just through tone of voice. So instead of a sing-songy, this is so frustrating, match the child's emotion. Oh, this game can be so frustrating. We can also acknowledge feelings with writing, such as writing down something the child wants at the store or for dinner. For example, child you're working with really wants something they see in another therapist's room while walking by, and they start getting upset. You could say, I see that you really want to play with that dollhouse. It looks like it would be so fun to play with, doesn't it? We're not going to play with it today. I am going to write it down so I remember to get it for next week. Remember, acknowledging what a child wants doesn't mean you have to give it to them right now. We can also acknowledge feelings with art. I've had a lot of success doing this with children who have more limited language skills. It can be as simple as angry scribbles with a crayon to express rage. When confronted with someone else's negative feelings, the first two instincts are often to fix it or diminish it. When someone is upset, it's human nature to want to just fix the problem so they feel better. But as we know from our own experiences, we usually just want someone to listen, not fix it or give unsolicited advice. Same with diminishing the problem or engaging in positive toxicity, aka flipping on the light, such as, it's no big deal, oh, you're so awesome, and the child is clearly upset. This just makes us more comfortable, but isn't being in the vulnerability and uncertainty that the child is in. These are some magical, true and tried phrases to validate feelings that help children feel seen, accepted, and less alone. First, you didn't want that to happen. Many meltdowns happen because the child is disappointed, and this phrase really gets to the core of that feeling. For example, blocks fall, their crayon breaks, they spill their drink, ice cream fell. You didn't want that to happen. You wish the crayon didn't break. Another magical phrase for when everything is upsetting a child and nothing you do seems to help is, nothing feels good. Nothing feels as good as you want it to. This isn't actually changing anything, but naming what's true makes the child feel seen and less alone. Another idea is to give in fantasy what you can't give in reality. You really wish we could keep playing together. I wish that you could stay and play with me for 100 more hours. Lastly, a simple acknowledgement of saying something happened can be powerful when you aren't quite sure what's upsetting the child. Labeling feelings teaches the critical vocabulary of emotions so that a child can eventually learn to use these words on his own. So one day he can yell, "I'm so frustrated," instead of throwing all the toys off the table again. I honestly used to talk about feelings in depth once a year during our emotions thematic unit, but now I try consciously to incorporate talking about feelings during all my weekly sessions. We need to talk about feelings in advance and teach about emotions because this sends the message that feelings are okay and normal. I now try to frequently talk about my own emotions, such as, "Oh, I'm so frustrated, I can't get this water bottle to open. It's so annoying when the lid gets stuck." We can also talk about the feelings of other children, such as other students in your classroom, siblings during therapy sessions, other kids in the waiting room, might be on the playground during recess and can comment, "Oh, look, Ava just went down the slide by herself. She looked nervous at first, but now she is so proud." We need to be able to identify 28 emotions to develop emotional fluency and convey the full range of the human experience. That's almost 10 times the number of emotions beyond your basic happy, sad, and mad. Children need emotional vocabulary that is as expansive as their experiences. Because the limits of a child's language mean the limits of their world. And as Brene Brown once said, language shows us that naming an experience doesn't give the experience more power. It gives us the power of understanding and meaning. Words matter because using the correct specific word shapes how we feel and how others respond. If a child says, "I'm so mad," when what they're really feeling is disappointment, they can't reconcile, regulate, and move through that emotion and heal it as powerfully as they could if they had named it accurately. Instead of protecting children from hard feelings, we want to prepare them. We can prepare kids by teaching them about feelings. There are truly so many ways to teach kids about feelings, both directly and indirectly. First, we want to normalize talking about feelings, and then talk about feelings when they naturally come up. Try to weave in discussions about feelings into everyday life, talking about and validating feelings in yourself, child, and others. And it's never too early to start. We can start talking about the feelings of young babies. "I hear you want your bottle right now. Just so frustrating to have to wait." I get that. With babies, we can also talk about the expressions they make and label the feelings they're expressing. Babies can also start to copy our facial expressions, and you can make a back and forth serve and return game of copying expressions. With young infants, one of the primary goals is developing the adult skill at recognizing how to talk about feelings so that the parent is then in the habit of identifying more complex feelings. Then when the child is older and able to understand, we've already been inputting it for their entire life. So a lot of it comes down to retraining ourselves as adults and practicing how to identify our own feelings, such as, is that anger or is that fear? Since fear often masquerades as anger. Remember, skills build on each other, and we have to start at the beginning. Starting around 12 to 18 months, children can start to show comprehension of feelings, feeling words, and can make faces for different emotions, such as saying, "Show me your mad face." So just as we might ask a toddler, "What does the cow say?" we can ask kids to make faces for different emotions to teach emotional vocabulary in calm, connected moments. Books are a truly powerful way to easily incorporate teaching about emotions. There are an abundance of books specifically on emotions. Here are just a few examples and a couple more. And some companies like Slumberkins are entirely dedicated to teaching emotional literacy and regulation skills through books, stuffed animals, affirmation cards, etc. But using everyday books are perfect for teaching emotions. Almost every book, when you really look at it, incorporate feelings since feelings are a part of everyday life. We're going to flip through some examples now and just show how you can take books and really organically weave in emotions. Look at the pictures and take note of some of the examples of things that you might target. Another way I really love to teach emotions is taking pictures of the child. This puts the child at the center of the narrative, and children love pictures of themselves. There's so many things that you can do with pictures. For infants and toddlers, just use pictures the families already have. Ask them to find pictures with a variety of emotions. Here's some toddlers. And for older toddlers in preschool age and beyond, it can work well to have the child make a variety of facial expressions. Here are a few examples of this done with my own clients. I love to then take the pictures and create a feelings book. Here's an example for an infant. Sometimes I feel sad. It's okay to feel sad and cry. Hugs from mommy and daddy help me feel better. This narrative can also be helpful for families to get used to. Here's another example. Sometimes I feel curious. The world around me is so new and exciting. And here's a toddler example. Sometimes I feel so mad. It's okay to feel mad. And everyone feels mad sometimes. When I'm mad, I might need to let out a lot of yells. Ah! Mommy will make sure I stay safe when I'm mad and will stay with me until my body feels calm again. This wording also is helpful to remind parents to validate the feeling, but still hold those boundaries. Sometimes I feel nervous. Everyone gets nervous sometimes, and it's okay to wait until I feel ready. Daddy will stay with me. I can be nervous and brave. Then for preschool and up, or as developmentally appropriate for the individual child, I love incorporating the child in this process. First, by having the child draw out what happened to make them feel that way, such as some examples here. Third one where the child is saying in Spanish, I feel scared when I see a cockroach. Then he drew himself being scared of the cockroach. Then my elementary school, having them write. In elementary and up, you can also start a true journal because kids process faster when writing about feelings. And here are some examples. And reminder, child's journal is not the time to correct grammar. You can also make a feelings chart with the pictures and label feelings. Here's another example of one in Spanish. And with permission from families, you can also exchange pictures between clients so kids can talk about the feelings they see in other kids. Preschool age and above, all kids also really enjoy using their pictures to make memory matching games, play Go Fish or bingo. You can also have children express feelings through art, even if it's just scribbling to express rage. Feelings can also be targeted during other language experiences and therapy activities. Feelings don't need to be the focus of every session, but should be talked about in each session to some degree. So the ultimate goals are for caregivers to make talking about feelings a part of daily life and validating the underlying feelings in children. And also for children to learn how to ultimately use specific emotional vocabulary to express their emotional experience, whether that's saying mad instead of hitting or throwing, or as a client of mine recently said, I saw at school that Oliver had green ear molds and my new ear molds are blue. I wish I had picked green too. I think I feel regret.
Okay, so this brings us to connection and control. A concept to illustrate this idea is that all children have two buckets that need to be filled up on a daily basis: the power control bucket and the attention connection bucket. When a child is frequently acting out, it may be a sign that one of these two buckets might be running low. Young children who feel like they're being controlled often act out because they're trying to seek a greater sense of agency. We're all familiar with the effective strategy of giving a child choices. Do you want the green cup or the blue cup? Another strategy for children who are engaging in constant power struggles is to brainstorm with families how to relinquish control in other areas. Perhaps the child can have more say in what he wears, help pick out snack options, have more opportunities for free play, etc. Because we are all looking to have agency in things that are going to happen in our life. In addition, we want to save our no's. Did you know that the average 1-year-old hears the word no an astonishing 400 times per day? Start saving no for when you really need it, when it's an issue of safety. Another tip to make a child feel less controlled is to do away with the word don't as much as possible. So tell the child what to do instead. Instead of don't climb on the table, say sit in the chair. By offering what to do, we take the extra processing weight off of the child. Now they don't have to think of the alternative behavior. This can best be described as through the task, don't think of an elephant versus think of a zebra. In both cases, our goal is for the child not to think of an elephant. But in the first instruction, they not only have to think of another animal, but they also have to distract themselves from the elephant. In the latter, we've diverted attention away from the elephant by giving an alternative animal to think about. We've achieved our goal by taking on more of the task and reducing the load on the child. After giving an alternative behavior, followed up with a choice. Do you want daddy to push your chair in or mommy? Do you want to sit in the brown chair or the blue chair today? By offering a choice, we reduce the load while also allowing the child to maintain reasonable control of their situation. So we both win. Additionally, we have a much higher chance of engaging cooperation if kids feel seen and acknowledged first. Try to connect before you request. Enter their world and recognize what's going on for the child before placing a demand. Often when we place a demand, such as time to go or put on your shoes, put away the iPad, the child is in their own world and thus doesn't comply. Prioritizing connecting first and seeing what's happening in the child's own world is really important. We might notice that they're watching a video and may be more likely to comply if we wait until a more natural transition. 1 or 2 minutes isn't going to make a huge difference in our day, but may make a big difference in their willingness to comply. That allows for regulation and movement towards cooperation for something that's important in your world. Remember that comprehension does not equal compliance. So just because a child understands what you're asking doesn't mean that they're going to do it. So let's put it all together. First, connect to help the child feel seen. Then, embody your authority and put a boundary around the behavior. Then hold that boundary. Validate the feeling, and finally, give a choice. But what if you've used all those strategies and the child still has a meltdown? Then what? Now we enter tantrum territory.
So you may have noticed that the title of this presentation was Taking on the Tantrums, yet there are only a handful of slides specifically dedicated to tantrums. That's because the tantrum is just the tip of the iceberg. The tantrum is actually about all of those underlying feelings, urges, and stresses, the need for clear, consistent boundaries, the need for connection and control. They're still developing self-regulation and coping skills. We know that young children lack the brain maturation, life experience, and emotion regulation skills to hold it together when they experience big emotions. So they rely on us as adults to support them. First, it's critical to define a tantrum. Tantrums are biological states of dysregulation, not willful acts of disobedience. Tantrums are normal and even healthy. They occur because the child's ability to want things for themselves and to feel so deeply in their body outpaces their ability to regulate those feelings. There's a mismatch or a gap. Tantrums are a manifestation of a child's distress, not his defiance. The child feels so upset and is so overwhelmed with wants and feelings, but doesn't yet have the regulation skills to manage those feelings. Tantrums may occur over what seems like a ridiculous reason. However, it feels very real and important to the child. Sometimes, though, tantrums may also be due to built up frustration and distress and are not really about what they seem to be melting down over. This is just their way of letting it all out. This overwhelmed feeling sends them to an automatic stress response in their lower brain. First, here are some things not to do during a tantrum. We don't want to give into the child's demands. We need to hold the boundary. We also don't want to tell a child to use your words. They often really can't find words in this highly dysregulated state. Likewise, using logic and explanations, expecting a child to answer questions, trying to reason, convince, or negotiate will all be ineffective. Keep in mind that the child is in fight or flight mode during a meltdown. They are in a purely emotional place, and the logical parts of their brain literally cannot be reached. We also don't want to use shame, punishment, ignoring, or timeout. As discussed before, these strategies don't teach the child the skills they were missing in the first place and just teach them that they're alone. We also definitely don't want to add fuel to the fire. Having a parent yelling back at the child just adds chaos to chaos. Finally, a little more nuance, but we actually don't want to distract a child who's in the heat of a tantrum, such as by pulling up a YouTube video to get them to stop. The child needs to feel that we can handle their emotions so that they learn how to as well. Distraction discourages awareness and takes away their opportunity to learn how to navigate their feelings. However, once a child works through the emotions and the heat of the tantrum has passed, then using redirection and offering some choices can definitely be helpful. You may be wondering now, okay, so what can I do? How can I fix the tantrum? And I don't know if what I'm about to tell you will be relieving or disappointing, but you can't. It is not our job to end a tantrum. It is our job to calm our own bodies and to keep the child and others safe. During a tantrum, first and foremost, keep calm and grounded. Remember that idea of co-regulation and the boats in the water. Be the calm in their chaos. Children need to see that we are unthreatened by their behavior and that we can handle it, that their feelings don't overwhelm others and are not contagious. During a tantrum, we also need to keep the child and others physically safe. We need to stop any dangerous behavior using language like, I won't let you hit, and physically prevent the behavior or move to a safer place. We also need to continue to hold boundaries. Definitely don't give in to what caused the meltdown, but also hold space for the child's emotions and validate the feelings. Although in the peak of a tantrum, the child likely isn't listening and your calm presence is enough. And then it's just allowing feelings to run their course. It's important not to leave the child alone. It may be helpful to move to a smaller room together. The child's calm and loving presence don't reinforce bad behavior. The child needs connection and to see that their feelings don't overwhelm the adults in their lives. And through this powerful co-regulation, one day they too will be able to manage their feelings. So let's say you made it through the meltdown. Whew, you did it. Now let's think of the things you can do outside of the difficult moment to help the child learn the coping skills that they need so they're less likely to have a massive meltdown in the future. When a child is having a tantrum, they are completely dysregulated and cannot learn new skills in that moment. Their prefrontal cortex is offline and they're in threat mode, not learning mode. But we have to build regulation skills so kids have fewer meltdowns in the future. We need to build these skills in calm moments. I know for myself in the past, I would just want to move on once the tantrum had passed. And the last thing I wanted to do was revisit or talk about the tantrum. But we need to help the child and the family build regulation skills that we're missing in the first place. Building these skills during calm and connected moments can reduce future tantrums. There are many more strategies for moments when the child is calm compared to when in the middle of a meltdown. When a child's body is in threat state, which is what happens during a tantrum, we just have to help them work through those moments. But when a child is calm, that's when we can work on teaching self-regulation skills. None of us, adults or children, learn in the heat of the moment. It's like trying to teach your star basketball player a new layup skill in the middle of the March Madness championship game. A coach would never do that. They would thoroughly practice the skill during practice time when the heat is off. We need to be emotion coaches for children. I do want to briefly note that learning how to apply these skills is far outside the scope of today's presentation. I highly encourage you to explore the resources listed at the end to learn more. If you will be attending the A.G. Bell National Symposium this summer, I'll also be discussing these strategies much more in depth during a presentation that is specific to building emotion regulation skills. But to state it briefly, we can help develop regulation skills and prepare the child for the feelings by talking about the feelings in advance and practicing situations where the child often becomes dysregulated. We can use strategies such as dry runs, where the skill is practiced ahead of time in a calm, connected, and even silly moment, as well as emotional vaccination, where the child is prepared for the feeling in advance. Because when a difficult moment happens, the child's dysregulation is due not just to the hard feeling, but also by being surprised by that feeling and not having the coping skills to handle it. Adult modeling can also take away the shame of aloneness in a struggle. such as an adult modeling their frustration with having to wait for a turn or their disappointment in not getting something that they want. One of my favorite strategies is building regulation skills through play, such as acting out with dolls, how to handle big feelings, and behavior with siblings, and acting out school drop-off with farm animals. This can be so powerful because play is where children learn best, and they can master these skills in the safe world of play. And kids really do get it, and that's why play therapy can be so effective. Children are able to explore, express themselves, and learn new regulation skills through play. These strategies help them practice coping with these feelings and learn skills to handle them so they're prepared in the future. We can also use strategies after a hard moment so the child can better process what happened. We can retell the event and walk the child through the sequence of events that caused the meltdown and name the feelings that the child may have been experiencing. As we narrate what they just went through, they can start to understand that what these emotions feel like, and we can reassure them that these feelings are normal. You can use self-talk and parallel talk to narrate what happened to help them cope with the feelings that they've just experienced, while also building their language skills. Children who are verbal can co-author the story and share their perspective on what happened. You may find the child wanting to share the story multiple times. This adds coherence, regulation, and integration to a moment that felt so out of control before. Teaching specific coping skills ahead of time and brainstorming with the child on what helps them feel better can allow the child to access these skills in the hard moment. Coping skills such as mindful breathing, teaching hot cocoa breaths, yoga for kids, meditation and mindfulness, physical touch such as petting the dog, sensory experiences such as a stress ball or squeezing ice cubes, finding safe ways to express anger, such as hitting a pillow, using movement, going for a walk, doing jumping jacks, taking a pause, teaching the child how to stop and walk away when angry, engaging in a favorite activity, reaching out to others, writing in their journal, and using positive self-talk. And it seems lofty, but kids really get this. You can also create a calming corner where the child's feeling charts and coping skills chart can be displayed for easy reference. It doesn't need to be an Instagram perfect space. A corner of a room works perfectly. This is an example of a real life execution from a family I'm working with. His mother used the corner of his room that already had books and a chair and simply added his feelings chart, his coping skills chart, his journal, and then some pens to write with. I know we flew through the coping skills examples in interest of time, but it all comes down to choosing strategies that meet the child's unique emotional regulation needs. When possible, having the child come up with what works best for them. And of course, this is all done in a calm, connected moment. As adults, we can also model. I know when I'm feeling anxious, it helps me take 5 deep breaths and walk outside. How about you?
Okay, so some final considerations for you and how to take what we've discussed and use it on Monday. I want to acknowledge that we understand that approaching families and parenting partners with these strategies can often be the most difficult portion of behavior management, especially if we've been counseling our families to use more traditional behavior management techniques up to this point. It's important to be frank about the fact that we are all continuous learners who are constantly evolving. One script could include a statement such as, I recognize that I've told you to do other things in the past, but I've recently learned compelling evidence for a new approach. Holding back judgment and criticism, both with the families we work with and with ourselves, is important in order to make progress. We also know that some professionals may be asking themselves, is it our place to intervene? It is our opinion that as professionals with a strong child development background and with goals that rely upon the child having a positive relationship with their caregiver, we are often the only professionals that the families have to ask for guidance. Therefore, it is important that we not only have the knowledge of an appropriate behavior management approach, but that we offer support when asked or provide assistance when we see them struggling. Remember, parents are doing the best they can with their resources, both internal and external, and that they have in that moment. Our role is to provide them and ourselves with more resources and support when the child is having frequent big feelings and are in the midst of learning self-regulation skills. Parents may know that their discipline methods are ineffective, but don't know what else to do. Many parents are really wanting more. It is also critical to know when behavior management falls outside of what is considered typical and when to refer to a child development specialist, social worker, child psychologist, or developmental pediatrician for more intensive intervention. Recognizing when behavior management is a red flag for further developmental concerns is just as meaningful as implementing strategies when appropriate. Additionally, it's important to note that not every child is going to respond the same way. And we must recognize that there may be additional factors to consider when guiding parents on how to manage these behaviors. We need to use the principles outlined here and adapt to each child. Even if a child is nonverbal or does not have access to sound yet, and they don't hear or understand all of this verbal input, they are picking up on everything else. Our tone of voice, nonverbal cues such as facial expressions and gestures, and even our body position are things that parents can start to pay attention to as they apply these behavior strategies. Using a calm tone of voice, keeping a neutral facial expression, and meeting the child at their level are all things that will help, even when they don't have the language ability to benefit from everything we're saying. We also must remember that children with additional disabilities learn in different ways, and these strategies may need to be tweaked to fit the child's additional needs. I would argue that it would be just as important for a child with neurodivergence to learn emotional words as it is for them to learn colors and shapes. These kids are often at risk for higher instances of emotional dysregulation that typically developing kids are. So if they can learn language to express their emotions when, maybe their facial expressions are not showing us what they're feeling, then we can better connect with these kids and meet them where their needs are. So lastly, behavior management strategies differ across cultures and geographic regions. And as clinicians, we need to be respectful of these differences when presenting parents with these additional techniques. So lastly, just like the child couldn't learn in that moment, an adult is the same. When the child is dysregulated, the parent may also become dysregulated, frustrated, and sometimes embarrassed. For that reason, we must provide guidance on these strategies outside of the moment and let them know that it may be awkward. When using these strategies in real life, it may feel clumsy, but with practice, it will begin to feel more natural. We also need to remind parents that change in their child's behavior is not going to happen instantly. The child needs consistency, practice, and time to develop these self-regulation skills to apply in future situations. They also sometimes just need to get a little older for some behaviors to extinguish. Remember that tantrums are developmentally appropriate for some ages, and we expect to see them. By staying consistent in behavior management strategies, we can support development through those tougher times, and children emerge with lifelong skills. So to wrap things up, here are some key takeaways for you as we move into some real-life examples.
So we're now going to go through some real-life applications of these principles to show you how they can be applied in everyday life. And then afterwards, we'll have time for some questions. I want to note that the names have been changed to protect the privacy of my patients. First, we're going to talk about Audrey, who's a 16-month-old girl. Audrey was repeatedly throwing blocks while seated in her high chair during therapy. Each time she threw, her mother would state, "No, no, no, Audrey, blocks are not for throwing. We don't throw blocks." Audrey would then smirk as if to say, "Well, I sure do," and would throw another block. Her mother would then just give her back the blocks, and the cycle continued. I asked her mother, "I wonder what's going on for Audrey. What do you think is the feeling underneath the behavior of throwing?" In past sessions, we had talked about the concept of behavior as the tip of the iceberg and how to consider the most generous interpretation of the situation. Her mother stated, "Well, I used to think of her just as defiant and purposely trying to make me mad, but I think she's just trying to figure out what happens." Exactly. The underlying feeling was likely curiosity. Wow, look what happens when I throw. It falls down. Gravity's cool. And also testing limits and figuring out boundaries. What is mommy going to do about it? Seems like she has a big reaction and then gives me the blocks back. We then use the strategies of providing connection and validation, saying something like, wow, I see it is so fun to watch, to throw and watch the blocks fall to the ground. And then setting the boundary. I won't let you throw blocks. And following through by taking the blocks away the very next time she threw or blocking the throw. This isn't punishment, but rather a boundary. Her mother then validated her feelings when she got upset that the blocks were put away. I know you're disappointed. You really wanted to throw your blocks. And found an alternative that was acceptable. I won't let you throw blocks. You can throw socks or balls. Her mother then grabbed one of each and gave her a visual choice. Audrey picked the socks. We then got her out of her high chair, grabbed some socks, and practiced throwing them into a laundry basket. Let's get out all of that throwing energy. Throw, throw, throw. Her mother started having Audrey throw socks and soft balls into a laundry basket before putting her in her high chair, and the frequency of throwing in therapy decreased dramatically. Also want to note that at the time, Audrey had been hearing with her cochlear implants for only 6 months. She didn't really have the receptive language skills yet to understand everything we were saying. However, she could still clearly understand the tone of voice, body language, the empathy, the action of holding the boundary by taking away the blocks, and she was visually given alternative choices and shown a safe way to throw. Now we have Ava, age 2. I logged into our teletherapy session and Ava was in a full-on tantrum. Ava was screaming and pointing to grandma's phone, so I quickly figured out what happened. Ava's grandmother was yelling back at her using shaming language. You're an ungrateful brat. You are such a spoiled kid. The more her grandmother screamed, the more Ava screamed. It was truly adding fuel to the fire. In previous sessions, during calm moments, we had been talking about the concept of co-regulation and trying the incredibly difficult task of staying calm during a tantrum. No one could hear me over Zoom with all the screaming, but I gestured boat to remind Ava's grandmother of the idea of co-regulation and being the calm in her storm, since we had previously used the graphic of the boat shown earlier. Her grandmother saw this, took a deep breath, and grounded herself. She stayed with Ava in her hard moment and repeated out loud several times the phrase that we had learned during a previous session, talking about having a lens shift. You're a good kid having a hard time. You're a good kid having a hard time. Repeating that phrase out loud was as much for Grandma's benefit, to remind herself that Ava wasn't intentionally giving her a hard time. Her grandmother also reminded herself that it wasn't her job to end the tantrum, and calmly waited it out without leaving her alone in her hard feelings. Ava screamed and flailed on the floor next to her grandmother for another few long minutes. The tantrum eventually passed, and Grandma offered a hug. After a hug, Ava still wanted her grandmother's phone. We then used the language of 2 things are true to set a boundary while providing validation for the feelings. 2 things are true. Phone time is over, and you're allowed to be mad about it. I'm here. We then offered a choice of 2 alternative activities. Ava picked bubbles. Next up, we have Christopher, who is 3. We were doing a teletherapy session in the kitchen around washing dirty dishes at the sink. Christopher then reached over and grabbed a sharp knife that was lying on the adjacent counter. Dad took the knife away, and Christopher started hitting his father. In the past, when Christopher would start hitting or exhibiting any type of behavior, his father would respond by yelling and telling him he was going to go get el cinturón, a belt, to hit him with. Christopher used to stop the behavior momentarily out of fear, but no long-term change occurred because he wasn't learning the skills needed to handle the feeling the next time, and he was also just learning to fear his father. Christopher's father and I had done a lot of work in previous sessions exploring this different approach to behavior management during calm moments. So this time, when Christopher started to hit, his father was able to remember his job as establishing safety through setting and holding boundaries, as well as providing validation and empathy for Christopher's feelings. His father stated, I won't let you hit, and gently but firmly held his wrists to block another hit, providing the boundary that Christopher needed during his moment of dysregulation. Once holding him, his father added, it's okay to be mad. Christopher collapsed in his father's arms and started to sob. His father stayed calm and present, using the strategy of co-regulation. Once the crying subsided, He then stated, "You really wish you could have the knife. Part of my job is to keep you safe. And right now, safety means not playing with knives. It's okay to be really frustrated and mad about that. It's hard for me not to get something I want to." They both took a few deep breaths, and then his father offered him two safe options, a spatula or a wooden spoon. Christopher picked the spatula, and we resumed our dishwashing activity. Lily, age 4, was coloring during a therapy activity when she noticed her older sister had a pink crayon that she wanted right now. She tried to grab the crayon from her sister's hand, but when her sister refused to give it to her, she then pulled her sister's hair. Behavior like this had been frequent in the past, where mom tended to either just give Lily whatever she wanted, which taught her that there were no boundaries, or threatened to call dad on the phone in an attempt to get Lily to behave, which is an empty threat and also sends multiple wrong messages, including that dad should be feared and that mom isn't a sturdy enough leader to handle this situation. During call moments in past sessions, we had talked about family jobs. And so this time when Lily tried to swipe the crayon and pull her sister's hair, her mother embodied her authority and said, "I won't let you pull her hair." By saying, "I won't let you," she showed Lily that she could be the boundary that she couldn't be for herself. Once her mother had put a physical boundary around the behavior by gently but firmly holding Lily's hands so she couldn't pull hair, she immediately followed it up with connection and validation, seeing the wish, urge, and feeling underneath the behavior. "You really wish you could draw with the pink crayon right now. It's so hard to wait for a turn. I get that." She then gave a choice. While waiting for your sister to finish her turn with the pink crayon, do you want to pick another crayon or blow bubbles instead? Lily opted for the purple crayon, and a few minutes later, her sister smiled, handed her over the pink crayon, and said, "I'm done. Now it's your turn." Next up, we have Ethan, who is 5 years old. I logged into our teletherapy session, and he was crying. His mother told me that he was upset because he had been coloring in his coloring book while waiting for our session to start and accidentally colored outside the lines. His mother first tried telling him, "It's not a big deal," dismissing and invalidating, then tried telling him that he was so good at drawing, such a great artist, flipping on the light. When this just made him cry harder, his mother then switched to telling him he could get an ice cream if he just stopped crying, bribing, and then telling him he couldn't go to the park later if he didn't stop, threatening. In previous sessions during call moments, we had started talking about the importance of validating feelings. So I gently asked his mother, "I wonder what would happen if we tried using some of those phrases we were talking about last time." His mother agreed to try. I then said, "Hey, Ethan, I hear you're really disappointed and frustrated with your picture. You didn't want that to happen." Ethan looked up, tears rolling down his cheeks, and nodded. Encouraged by this change, his mother then jumped in and said, "Yeah, I get really frustrated when I'm trying to do something and it doesn't happen the way I want it to. I get that." His mother then offered him a hug, and afterwards, he was able to engage in the rest of the therapy session. Deep down, all he really needed was to be seen. Justin, age 6, was becoming quickly dysregulated during therapy sessions, and when something was hard for him, he would quickly become frustrated, cry, and shut down. In the past, his mother had tried sticker charts to reward good behavior and timeouts for bad behavior, neither of which resulted in any long-term change, since neither rewards nor punishments teach skills. Remember, if you have a kids do well if you want to philosophy, then when a child isn't doing well, the belief is that it's because he doesn't want to, which informs how we respond to behavior, focusing on punishments for bad behavior and incentives for good behavior, since the belief is that the child just wasn't motivated. So instead of figuring out how to motivate Justin, we had to figure out what was getting in his way and how to teach him those lagging skills. Since we know that kids do well when they can, we've realized that Justin just didn't have any real frustration tolerance skills. So over the next several months, we incorporated teaching about feelings and coping skills into our LSL intervention. This all occurred when I too was first learning about the importance of emotional literacy for kids. His mother took pictures of him making different expressions. We made a feelings book. We played games such as memory, go fish, bingo, all while simultaneously targeting and incorporating his other speech and language goals. We taught him how to journal. We talked about coping skills, what made us feel better when feeling anxious, disappointed, frustrated, etc. He then made his own coping skills chart for his various feelings and what coping skills helped him, such as doing hot cocoa breaths, squeezing a stress ball, doing jumping jacks, saying a mantra. His mother learned how to model her own frustration and healthy coping skills to take away the shame of aloneness. With guidance, she used the strategies of dry runs and emotional vaccination to prepare him ahead of time for situations that will be hard. This process of teaching Justin so many regulation skills occurred over many, many months. It was not an overnight shift. But the other week, we were working on his final speech and language evaluation as he's about to graduate our program. We were getting towards the end of a sub-test and things were starting to get really hard. I could see the frustration building up in his face. He then took a deep breath and said, "I'm feeling a bit frustrated right now." And then he repeated his own mantra, "It's hard, I can do it." Last, we have Leo, who is 7. Leo came home really upset one day after being bullied at school because his parents had been working with him for a while on teaching about emotions and validating his feelings and connecting with him. Leo had developed a really strong foundation in emotional literacy, and he also knew that he could turn to his parents for that support. So he opened up fairly quickly and told his dad that he had felt humiliated at school because kids were making fun of his hearing aids. His dad, when telling me the story later, told me that his first instinct when hearing his son was being made fun of was 1, fix it. What are the names of these kids? I'm calling their parents. Or 2, flip on the light with toxic positivity. You are so awesome. You're so great. Don't worry what those other kids think. Go find someone else to play with. But instead, his dad just listened, thanked Leo for sharing with him, and then provided empathy by validating his feelings and helping him not feel alone in his pain. His dad said, "Wow, that sounds really hard. When I was your age, I got bullied for wearing glasses. I felt angry and humiliated. I know what that feels like, and it's really hard. I'm here for you." His dad told me that they then just sat together in silence for a while. His father shared that Leo later journaled about what happened and worked through his coping skills and talked to his parents about how to handle things at school. But his father shared that he felt confident that in that initial hard moment, his compassionate presence was the only thing that Leo needed. And he felt so grateful that he knew the power of simply showing up for his son in that way. We're now going to end with the Wholehearted Parenting Manifesto, written by Brene Brown. Above all else, I want you to know that you are loved and lovable. You will learn this from my words and actions. The lessons on love are in how I treat you and how I treat myself. I want you to engage with the world from a place of worthiness. You will learn that you are worthy of love, belonging, and joy every time you see me practice self-compassion and embrace my own imperfections. We will practice courage in our family by showing up, letting ourselves be seen, and honoring vulnerability. We will share our stories of struggle and strength. There will always be room in our home for both. We will teach you compassion by practicing compassion with ourselves first, and then with each other. We will set and respect boundaries. We will honor hard work, hope, and perseverance. Rest and play will be family values, as well as family practices. You will learn accountability and respect by watching me make mistakes and make amends, and by watching how I ask for what I need and talk about how I feel. I want you to know joy, so together we will practice gratitude. I want you to feel joy, so together we will learn how to be vulnerable. When uncertainty and scarcity visit, you'll be able to draw from the spirit that is a part of our everyday life. Together we will cry and face our fear and grief. I will want to take away your pain, but instead I will sit with you and teach you how to feel it. We will laugh and sing and dance and create. We will always have permission to be ourselves with each other. No matter what, you will always belong here. As you begin your wholehearted journey, the greatest gift that I can give you is to live in love with my whole heart and to dare greatly. I will not teach or love or show you anything perfectly, but I will let you see me, and I will always hold sacred the gift of seeing you, truly, deeply seeing you. here are some resources to learn more in our references. And any questions? Well, I have some in the chat. And here's also our contact information. All right. Sarah, do you want to? Oh, there's that sharing.
That was so good, you guys.
Thank you. All right, so should we have about 10 minutes. Should we start from the top?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so first question. Oh, go ahead, Sarah.
Well, I was just going to say the last comment I think is really important to address as well, about the lack of sleep. I think, as you're kind of thinking and as we answer these other questions, it's really important to recognize that this is all coming from an understanding that we have to fill our cups as parents and as adults, and the speech language pathologists, deaf, hard of hearing teachers, we have to fill our cups first. So the comment was about a 2-year-old that doesn't sleep through the night. So then the parents are very tired dealing with the tantrums. And so, definitely recognizing our own capacities and trying to make sure that we're coming to these situations with as much strength and patience for ourselves as we can, and just recognizing that we're going to make mistakes and there are going to be moments that we're not proud of, and just kind of working towards a place where we can handle tantrums and behaviors how we want to, but not expecting that we're going to change overnight either. There are going to be challenges like kids not sleeping and us being sleep deprived. So as we're answering this, just kind of keep that in mind, that we are being mindful that sometimes we have to fill our cups first too. But yeah, anyway, absolutely. Okay.
No, so true. Thank you for that, Sarah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the top question, or first one we have, what do you recommend when a child tends to misbehave more with one parent over the other? They tend to butt heads often. I would say in my experience, at least, and Sarah, feel free to jump in, that tends to happen when, parents, perhaps, mother, father, have sort of a different approach to behavior management. And perhaps the child sees that, one parent is not so sure of their capacity to be that sturdy leader, such as in one of the case examples, where the mother in the past used to just say, oh, I'm going to call your father. And, the child learned that, oh, my mom doesn't actually know how to handle my feelings. So I think when parents can get on the same page and really see, what their job is as the adult, and, what is the job of the child, and they're using the same behavior management strategies, then I would think that sort of would resolve.
Yeah, I think also, recognizing that you can have different styles of parenting while having the same framework. Right. So, maybe a mom is more comfortable with giving, saying, I can't let you, I won't let you hit, but they feel more comfortable with letting the child punch a pillow or, go outside and run. Maybe a dad feels more comfortable giving choices that are, within the activity. So maybe it's, I won't let you hit. Do you want to, do something else with the train, or use the car instead? So you can find your own parenting style within this framework. And so understanding that, then I think it becomes a discussion between the parents and saying, okay, we both have this goal of helping our child not have as many tantrums and develop self-regulation skills. These are kind of the things that we agree upon. And then kind of reaching, okay, how are you going to do it? How am I going to do it? I think coming at it from a place of I went to this talk and this is the way that you need to change in order for our kid to listen to you, that's not going to work. You've got to find connection between you and your parenting partner, and then try to implement these things in a way that feels natural to you.
Yeah, no, definitely.
I want to, not to interrupt, I want to remind everyone, the quiz is in the chat box, not the Q&A box. The link is there. Nikki posted it. If you just scroll up just a little bit, you will see it.
The quiz links also, the bit.ly on the screen, and there's also a QR code. If you're using your phone, you can use your camera to access it.
On the
your phone.
screen, I don't see it yet. Oh, I see it. Yeah, sorry. My stuff's covering it. There's another question. Then why is timeout?
So next one, then why is timeout acceptable behavior management in daycare centers? And I would say it's because, you know, you do the best you can with the resources you have in the moment and what you know. And I did timeout for years with the patients I worked with. It only was in the past couple of years that I started to learn about this different approach and really dove into all the research and tried it out with my own families and, you know, really saw the power in it. So I think it's just timeout is a strategy. It's one of those traditional behavior management strategies that's been around for many years. Just because it is ineffective in teaching children long-term skills doesn't mean it's not still used. And I think it was Maya Angelou who once said, you know, you do the best you can until you know better. And once you know better, you do better. And so something I've become so passionate about is trying to take this information that I learned and saw how effective it was with my own families and share it with you all, and hope that you all will share it with the families you work with, and the parents watching this, that you'll share it with friends and other, you know, the people who are providing care to your children, because, you know, everyone does the best they can with what they know. And a lot of daycare centers use timeout because that's what they know. Sarah, is there anything you'd want to add to that?
Yeah, I think it's what they know, and also sometimes what they have the resources to do. So, you know, if you've got 6 kids in a class and you're only one person and one child is having a meltdown and the other kids are needing your attention, you know, timeout does then free you up to work with the other kids, which can seem like the right way to handle this situation. But what we know is that it doesn't provide a long-term solution, and that same kid is going to get put in timeout, you know, maybe every day, maybe multiple times a day. And so, you know, when you're able to, when you have more resources, maybe there's another adult in the classroom that can take on, you know, the rest of the class, and you can go address that that child's needs in a way that's better and more appropriate for them to then create long-term change. Yeah, I think it's, you know, a better alternative than, you know, something like corporal punishment, obviously, but still, you know, we are constantly evolving, like Sarah Radlinski was saying. So
yeah, and I think, you know, in a classroom or, you know, daycare kind of environment, in those calm moments, teaching some of these self-regulation skills. And, you know, if the child is having a meltdown, you know, instead of putting them in timeout in a corner, you know, just keeping them nearby. This question also, you know, I've had families ask, well, what if, you know, I have 3 kids in the home? I can't be right next to just one child when I have other kids that need attention and care. But I think not intentionally shaming and sending the child to be by himself, allowing the child to, you know, have that meltdown. You're going to physically, you know, prevent them from throwing, hitting, hurting anyone else or themselves, but allowing the tantrum just to pass sort of, you know, adjacent to maybe the rest of the class versus just separating them and sending them to be by themselves. And we have just one more minute. Let's see, you addressed children with autism in the presentation. Absolutely, yes. We want to use these same strategies. Might need to sort of scaffold. I found that using, you know, visual prompts can really help children who are on the spectrum, and, you know, having a lot of those pictures and, you know, trying to teach them the feelings vocabulary.
I think the question about the nap is a good one to address. So somebody asked, what if their child only acts out because they didn't have a nap? And I think that would be a great example of when to work on things outside of the moment and recognize that maybe you set the boundary out too far. So, you know, maybe you were playing a game, the child was acting really, you know, nicely and cooperating, and you were getting great language and all of that. And the child went past their nap time and now they're really tired and breaking down. I think it's important to recognize, okay, there, you know, I let my boundary go too far out because we were having a good time. next time I need to be sure that I, pull the boundary and set the boundary earlier, so that then this can stay a pleasant experience for both of us, rather than kind of taking it to that edge, that threshold.
Right. Yeah, and I think going back to that principle of kids do well when they can. I've had families ask, well, I know my kid knows how to do this, but they're, melting down. So are they intentionally doing it? And instead looking, okay, what are, is it a skill the child's missing, or is it that they're dysregulated because they are overtired, they are hungry, that, are those basic biological needs being met?
Yeah.
And we have a lot more questions coming in. I think, do we have our contact information pulled up maybe?
Well, I think what we can do is y'all can people can sign off if they want. If you guys feel comfortable like extending it for 10 more minutes, if people want those answers.
Yeah, sure.
I also, before people sign off completely, I want to say thank you again to one of our sponsors, which is KDH Research and Communication, for this webinar platform that they gave us, and other platforms that they gave us, as well as Nikki's brain that they gave us and her ability, because nothing could have been pulled off without her. So I definitely want to say thank you to that. And I do want to do one more housekeeping, which is reminder that we're sending out, take the quiz. You have a week to take it. And then we will grade things. Please be patient as we get certificates out. But if you have any questions, you can definitely contact Sherry Nybert, myself, or Kathy Newbern at KWENEWBERN@atlantaspeechschool.org. Nikki, one more housekeeping that I missed before we pass it back over to the girls for questions?
I posted this in the chat in response to some of the questions, but we'll be sending out an email with the links to the PDFs of the slides. So you'll have all of this contact information, all of the information that has been shared. And once I download and edit the recordings, they'll be posted on YouTube. Those links will be included in that email as well. And we will also include a link to a feedback survey to get your feedback on the webinar.
Oh, yes. Great. Thank you. All right, go to your questions, ladies.
All right, so next up we have, how do you find the best strategy to help them with their feelings, such as physical touch, hitting the pillow, physical movement, etc.? Inform consistency rather than trying 20 different things. So that's a great question. And I would say, depending on the age of the child, we really want the child involved in developing their, own coping skills plan as much as possible. So providing, maybe some choices, and then such as, okay, when, I first usually share what works for me. So like if I'm mad, what helps me is to, yell really loudly into a pillow, to, jump up and down, go for a walk outside, take 5 deep breaths. And then, mother will share, what she does when she's mad, or, the father or grandmother, whoever else. And then talking with the child, what are some things that you could try? And this is if the child has the verbal skills to do this. And so letting the child make some choices, but some of it's just trial and error. And especially with a younger child who maybe isn't as verbal, and you can provide choices sort of visually, but if the child isn't old enough to really be participating and making their own coping skills chart, then just some of it is trial and error, and showing the child, okay, really angry, and we're going to try punching this pillow, or you're really upset, we're going to model in calm moments, taking deep breaths, so then the child can take deep breaths in a moment when they're upset. But some of it is trial and error and figuring out what works for each kid, because as adults, what helps me feel better when I'm sad or anxious is not going to be what helps Sherry feel better when she's sad.
Timeout, sorry. Captioner, you are dismissed. Thank you so much. I meant to tell you that earlier. Thank you for asking. You were amazing. And we're very thankful for your time. Continue.
So some of it is trial and error, but I think, to the attendees' point, we don't want, there to be like 20 coping skills that the child, maybe has done once or twice. I think coming up with, okay, when you are sad, what are, 3 to 5 coping skills you can go to when you are angry, and Oh, if you're trying to say something, Sherry, you're on mute. No, not to me. Okay. Yeah, so Sarah, do you have anything you would want to add to that?
No, I think that's a pretty well-rounded answer. I think, again, it's like finding your style, finding what you're comfortable with, finding where your boundaries are. I know, between myself and my husband, we have very different thresholds for, sensory input. I tend to have a boundary that's much earlier. He can handle a lot more. And so, just finding what you're comfortable with, and kind of narrowing it down to that, and then figuring out what's comfortable for your child. Maybe it's noticing, oh, they tend to hit a lot, so let's redirect that behavior. Or, if it's a child that's not more prone to hitting, but they're more prone to yelling, like how can we use that, that natural inclination and make it a more positive, productive kind of behavior, rather than a one size fits all.
Right.
You may have two siblings and they need totally different boundaries. They need totally different like choices, different, maybe one a journal works really well with, and another writing is really frustrating for them. Like my brother would not have done a journal that included writing, but if you asked him to do something more physical, that would be a much better thing for him, versus physical stuff was much more frustrating for me, but writing was easy. So it's just kind of playing to each strength, which I think leads us into one of the other questions about having, more than one child, and that it can be really difficult to implement these things when you do have more than one kid. I think for sure, if you're starting with both children at the same time, working on this strategy, that can be very overwhelming, and you are going to have your hands full. And just remember, it does take time. But I think if you start with each kid as their infants, just like we're showing, we often think about doing emotional work when children become verbal, but especially with the kids that we work with that may be delayed. But also for all kids, we should start when they're very young, so then we're practicing as well. So there's no like quick, oh, here, just turn this little dial and both of your kids will be fine. Recognizing that what we're saying is a pretty dramatic shift from what most of us are doing anyway, and recognizing that it is going to take time and patience, and just every day coming at it as I'm going to do the best I can with what I have, and move in the right direction, even if those days kind of, sometimes we have a really good day, sometimes not so much, as long as it's kind of trending towards where you want to be.
No, absolutely. And wanted to add to the question about siblings. So the attendee had asked, said this is difficult to sort of implement with more than one child. And I would ask, at what point can we begin to hold children accountable for unkind actions? For example, if a child hits their sister, isn't it important to say that's not acceptable? If I heard as the victim, I won't let you hit, you wish you could hit your sister. If I was a sister, I would feel incredibly frustrated. So I think it's a great question, because I think some things maybe have been, this is a lot. There's so much information. So just wanted to clarify. So child hitting the sister, the parent is going to say to the child hitting, I won't let you hit, and physically stop the hitting. You can validate the underlying feeling. So it's not just, that, oh, you wish you could hit your sister. It's maybe you wish you could, and, why are they hitting? You wish you could have your sister's doll, or you are really angry right now, but you're stopping the hitting. Right. And so you are teaching the child that hitting is not acceptable. And I think, when we tend to think of, the victim versus the aggressor and all of that, yes, we absolutely need to protect the child who is receiving the hitting, the child who is being pushed, that sibling. Absolutely need to protect them. We need to physically stop that behavior. And also, we need to protect the child who is doing the hitting from developing that identity of being a bad kid. So we want to stop the behavior, but validate, the underlying feeling, because, why was the child hitting? And if you don't know, you can just say, I won't let you hit. It's okay to be mad or upset. something, vague, but we're definitely not being permissive, allowing the child to hit and,
Yeah.
So that
also recognizing if you're only addressing the child's behavior when they're doing bad behaviors, right? So if the child's hitting and really what they're looking for is you as the parent or you as the speech pathologist or whatever, for you to direct your attention to them with no distractions, that may be a cause for the behavior too. Oh, you hit your sister because I always direct my attention to you. So that's, I think, where the ignoring came from, is, oh, I'm not going to acknowledge this bad behavior. I'm going to ignore you. But if, we're distracted by phones or, work, the million things on our to-do list, and we're only giving the child attention when they're doing bad behaviors, then we need to also make a shift in okay, how can I give you my undivided attention when you're doing what I want you to do, so that then you're not then receiving that kind of positive reinforcement only when you're doing the negative behavior. So the attendee said it's so tricky to navigate, and I think it absolutely is. It's very multifaceted. That's why there's so much research on and resources on behavior management, because it's not a one size fits all. It's not a clear, oh, just do this and it'll work. It is very much trying to hold many factors at once.
Yeah, absolutely. Another question. Tendi said, our daughter's therapist uses time in with touch and co-regulation when it's safe, and time out when our daughter is not safe to be around others, such as being physically violent with a parent or teacher. What are your thoughts on that? And I guess I would say, time in is a way of thinking about, this whole concept that we are talking about, where, you are staying with the child during their moment of dysregulation. And, the attendee said that her child, that they use time out when the child is becoming physically violent. I guess I think it's just another way of reframing it. And, it would depend how old the child is. If the child, is the child old enough and large enough where the parent can't physically contain the child, or are we talking, a preschooler where the parent can stay near, allow the child to, be pounding on the floor, blocking, if they're throwing toys, but, allow the child to get out those feelings. A lot of times what works well is to go ahead and go to the child's room or go to a smaller space, which would be, considered timeout, but the parent or an adult goes with the child. So yes, you are removing yourself from that classroom or from that situation, but the child is not being left in aloneness. I think that's sort of key. And I know for, older kids or a child, maybe where they really could be physically violent, perhaps the parent, staying outside the door. So they are still nearby, but, they are also keeping themselves safe.
Yeah.
Okay. And then we have another question. At what point do you feel like something more is going on, like anxiety or therapy and interventions needed? And I think that's a great question, because, neither Sarah, I, or we're both therapists, but we are not psychologists. We are not, we're basically trying to use these principles with kids in our speech therapy sessions and teaching families how to do this at home. And I think, there are a lot of skills that can be incorporated, and even for children who do have additional needs, but I think it's also equally important to recognize when there's need for additional support. And, such in the case of trauma, we are not equipped to handle childhood trauma. That is, really needs to be addressed with a licensed professional in that area. So I would say try these strategies. The question is about anxiety. You can try these strategies, but if something keeps coming up for the child, definitely seek out additional professional support.
I think also anytime you have any instance of self-harm, if a child is hurting themselves, of course, that would be a time to get additional resources. I think recognizing that asking for additional help is not a failure on your part to be able to manage. I think if you're feeling overwhelmed, then it's a good time to get additional support. Just like with listening and spoken language, auditory verbal therapy, where, we're working with the parents to then be able to guide and coach the child. any other therapist is supposed to be able to provide a family with support. So if you as an adult feel like you're not comfortable helping your child work through their anxiety, or, you know, another behavior that you feel like is just too big for you, I think it's always good to get an additional professional involved, even if, you know, even if you feel like the child isn't too severe. Getting more support is never a bad thing. It can only help both of you to navigate what can be quite tricky. So I think a lot of the things that we're talking about here are when you feel like you are ready and well equipped to try these things on your own. But if at any point you feel like this is too much for me, asking for a referral to an additional professional is always appropriate. No one's ever going to kind of do a tisk. You came to us with not a real problem. You know, everyone is here to help.
Yeah, and I would say, you know, and also you can keep trying these strategies at home, you know, so sort of going back to, you know, the question about a child who is on the autism spectrum, or, you know, who has neurodivergence, that these strategies, they do work. And also we would expect the child to be getting additional support and not just behavioral support from speech language pathologists. So we can use these strategies maybe slightly adapted in our sessions. And also that child is going to need additional support outside of the expertise that, you know, we could provide. So one last question I see says
someone asked if we can put the screen back on, the quiz back on the screen. They're having problems downloading it. So Nikki will do that now. So thank you, Nikki. And the last question makes me laugh. I'm waiting. I'm excited to hear what you have to say about this one.
Well, it says, so it seems like empathy is key. How do you teach your spouse empathy so he can use those skills when working with our child? And I think that goes back to that idea of, you know, most generous interpretation. And I actually had a friend ask a similar question recently. You know, I was explaining this concept of most generous interpretation, and she said, well, if I'm using most generous interpretation of the child's behavior, how do I know that I'm not just being taken advantage of? He said, well, because your boundary isn't changing. In the example she had, you know, child melting down in the store, and, you know, it's like, well, you know, the least generous interpretation would be, wow, my child is a spoiled brat. Most generous interpretation would be, it would be really hard for me to go to a store, see a lot of things that I want, and not be able to leave with anything for myself. But that doesn't mean your boundaries change. You're still not giving the child what they're wanting just because they're melting down. It's sort of, you know, just reframing, using this new framework just softens you, and it allows you to sort of access that internal empathy by thinking, you know, what would have happened that would have made me at that age react like that.
I think also recognizing, you know, where, you know, if your partner is struggling with empathy, what are they reaching for instead? Is it anger? And why are they getting angry? And kind of ask them, hey, why are you mad about this? You know, because it may be, well, it's embarrassing when my kid doesn't behave on the playground. Like, well, why is it embarrassing? Because you think that other people don't understand that your kid is going through a developmental stage? Or is it because, you know, you were taught that your behavior was embarrassing to other people, you know, and kind of getting to the root of what is this anger or defensiveness or lack of empathy that you're seeing? What is that masquerading? And that can be a really tricky conversation to have, you know, and you have to have a lot of good communication with your partner to be able to have that conversation, trying to come at it genuinely curious rather than a predisposed answer of like, this is what I think that you think, or this is why I think you are the way that you are, and really, you know, being open to whatever their answer is. But I think for me, the biggest point that shifted things into an empathetic framework was understanding the jobs bit of our presentation. And and understanding that it is my job to stay calm and not be bothered by your behavior. And it is your job to have behavior that might bother me. And recognizing that we can both do our jobs well and that it can look like a mess on the outside, giving people permission to have their child melt down can make all the difference in them being able to access their other emotions. Because if they're feeling defensive, like this behavior shouldn't be happening, this is making me a bad parent because my child is behaving badly, then you're falling into that same cycle that we're trying to avoid in our kids of like, this is a bad behavior, I'm a bad person, I'm a bad parent. So, letting go of that and understanding that if you're doing your job well, it might still look like a disaster, but that gets better if you can maintain that co-regulation going back and forth.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one other thing I want to stress is that, change takes time and change feels awkward. And I mean, I first learned about this different approach a couple of years ago, and I mean, I've poured so much time into learning it. And sometimes there still are moments when, I'm like, oh, what would the best way to approach this be? Yeah. So, I guess what we're hoping from this presentation is, yes, to, you have some use it on Monday skills, but also that, this is sort of a new framework and shift that you do want to learn more about, because there are so many wonderful resources out there to, that allow you to explore this further. And change does take time, but what I've seen in the families that I've started this approach with is that it is so worth it, because the child, yes, on the one hand, there's, we just want to extinguish this behavior, we want to make it stop. When we're looking at the child's lifespan, we want to teach those skills that they're going to use for the rest of their life, because we're not training, this is not like a behavior extinguish training, we're raising humans. And, it is a process, but I think it's one that's really worth it.
Definitely worth it. You guys are worth it. That was awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think everything is shown with the Q&As and everything that people were really excited about the topics we did, and y'all did a great job presenting. Nikki, is there